Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This is Abdul Nasir Jangda. I'm joining you today from Dallas, Texas. Alhamdulillah, it's a great blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of us to be here together and for us to be able to have a conversation, a discussion today, hopefully that is spiritually beneficial and brings us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I very specifically today wanted to talk about the story of Salman Al-Farsi radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Now, why I want to talk about that particular story, I'll allow the story to make that clear to you. So I'd like to jump right in and start talking about the story itself. Salman Al-Farsi radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, very interestingly, tells us his story himself. He says that growing up, he was, it sounds like he was an only child. He doesn't explicitly say that. Either he was the youngest or he was the only child even. But suffice it to say that his father was just completely overprotective. His father was completely overprotective. And the way he tells the story, it sounds like maybe his mother had passed away or something like that, because he just talks about it as if it is him and his father, and that's it. And as a consequence of that, anyone who's a parent can tell you, you tend to be very protective of your children, especially when there has been some kind of issue or trauma in the family. You become even more protective of your children. So he says his father was completely overprotective. And he said it was to the point that it was suffocating. And he said, I had grown up now. I was a young man, what we would basically call an adolescent or a teenager, maybe just starting high school, that age. But he said, in spite of me being at that age, my father still protected me and guarded me as if I was a little child. And he specifically uses the analogy because in Persia at that time, in their culture at that time, they were very kind of hyperly overprotective of young girls, and so young daughters. And so he said, even though I was now a grown young man, my father was still treating me like I was a little girl. And he uses that analogy from their culture. Nevertheless, he says it was unbearable. And he said, my father was the mayor of our town. He was in charge of the tribe, in charge of the town and the city. And he said that attached to our home was the temple where the fire would burn, because they were Zoroastrian, Majusi. Those from Pakistan and India will know the term Parsi. So they worshipped at a fire. There's some nuanced discussion, whether they worship the fire or they're worshiping another deity or a god that is represented by that fire. That's besides the point. That's a nuanced theological discussion. At the end of the day, obviously, it's still an incorrect belief, an incorrect form of worship. It's shirk, what we call. So nonetheless, he said that that's what we did. And so that fire that we worshiped at was attached to, the temple was attached to our home. And he says that my father had basically made it my responsibility to serve that fire and to constantly tend to that fire. It was my job. I would make sure that it was lit and it was taken care of, and it would clean up the temple and things like that. So he said this continued on for quite some time. And finally, one day, there was a caravan that was passing through town. There was a caravan that was visiting our village in our town. And my father needed someone to run an errand. So he told me, he said, okay, go run this errand, go deliver this here, but come right back, and et cetera, et cetera. So he said, while I was on my way to deliver the errand, I passed by this monastery. Think of it as kind of like a church. And he says that monastery, there was a monk there, a Christian monk who worshiped there. And he said he had unsuccessfully for a very long time tried to convert our people to Christianity. And he said that these visitors, they were from, the area of Asham, which was under the control of the Roman Empire at that time, which was a Christian empire. So he said he was hosting them in his monastery. And I passed by there and I saw them praying and worshiping. And I was intrigued. I was fascinated. So he says, I went in and I started to watch them from a corner. They saw me and noticed me, and they called me in and they asked me to come and join them. And I did so. And it was an amazing experience. And he said hours and hours went by. I was talking to them, asking them what they do, why they do what they do, trying to understand everything. He said until hours had gone by and I didn't realize I still hadn't run the errand that I was sent to run. And I rushed back home and my father was waiting for me and he was furious. Where have you been? And because he was so overprotective, he was paranoid about me. And he said, I told him that, Dad, I found the most amazing thing. I found these people worshiping, and it's so much better than, what we do and how we do what we do and so on and so forth. And he said, my father was beyond angry. And he locked me up in the house and he said, you're never leaving ever again. And he said that the caravan had told me that they would be departing in a couple of days. So I sent a message to them through some friends or whatever that let me know before you depart. And he said one night the message came that we're going to be departing early tomorrow morning. So he says, I snuck out of my house and I went and I joined the caravan and I ran away. And I never looked back. Now, he said, I was on this quest for the truth. I wanted to know what I should really believe. Because I realized that I shouldn't be worshiping a fire or worshiping at a fire. I shouldn't be doing that. So what do I do now? So I traveled with these people till we came somewhere in kind of the old area that is referred to, the region that's referred to as the Levant, what we would maybe kind of call modern day Syria. I came to that area and they dropped me off at a monastery, a location of one of the most knowledgeable priests at that time about the old Christian religion, or so they said. So they dropped me off there and I started living there and wanting to study there and serving at the monastery. But he says, much to my dismay, I realized that this priest was extremely corrupt. He was taking donations from people, charity from people, and he was hoarding all that wealth. And he was burying it back behind the monastery, like almost like burying it at like a treasure chest. And he said this went on for some time until some people got a feeling that something was not right here. And they came inquiring one day and they interrogated me as well. And he said, I told them. Some narrations say that he went and actually reported the priest. In either case, the priest was stealing people's money. They found out. The people were enraged. The mob came, and he said they ended up killing the priest. And he said, I felt bad about that. That was a bit extreme, but nonetheless, that whole tragedy occurred. And he said, at this point in time, I was very shaken up. I had left my whole life behind. I gave up everything that I had, everything that I was, to believe in this, to find the faith and truth. And I was delivered to this corrupt man who was using religion to steal people's money. So he said, I was very shaken up by this. I said, nonetheless, I'm not going to give up my faith. I'm not going to give up my quest to find the truth. So he said, I asked around and they told me there's this elderly priest and monk, student of scripture, go to him. So he said, I went to him and I found him to be one of the best human beings, the best person I had met in my life up until that point. And he was pious and he was scrupulous and he was very studious. And I learned a lot from him and I benefited a lot from him. And I served him and his monastery, his church, until he passed away. He was very elderly. He passed away a little while later. As he was on his deathbed, I asked him, where should I go? And he told me, go to that other priest, because he's the eldest and most honest priest that I know of that remains. So he says, I went there and I started to once again study there, and I found this man to be an amazing man, very inspirational, very knowledgeable, very beneficial, very honest, very sincere, until he was on his deathbed as well. These were all very elderly men. He was on his deathbed, and I asked him, where should I go? And he said, nowhere. Now has come the time of the prophet of the last times. You should go to, and he said that, I will tell you some signs of him. And he gave him 3 signs, which I'll get to in just a minute. He said, where can I find him? He said, I don't know. But from what I understand, I think he's going to come from amongst these Arab people, referring to the Arabian Peninsula, what we modern day call like Saudi Arabia, that area. He's going to come from there, which was very shocking because these were pagan people who worshipped idols and were illiterate and had no concept of religion. Nonetheless, he said that he'll come from there. And he says, I don't know a lot more about the place that he'll be, where you can find him, but the one clue that I've been able to glean is that he will be in a place, in an area that has abundant date palm trees. There will be many date palm trees where he will arrive. So he said that I took those notes, and then he gave me 3 signs of the prophet himself. And I departed with this and started traveling in that direction. And he said I continued on until I was traveling, and I saw that there was this caravan, and traveling alone at that time in those days was very, very difficult. So he said, I asked the caravan, can I join up with y'all? They said, absolutely, sure. At night when we all went to sleep, they ended up betraying me. And they ended up, when I woke up in the morning, then I was chained, I was tied up. They had basically taken me prisoner and had intended to sell me in the marketplace as a slave. So he said this was very, very tragic, obviously, to go to sleep a free man on a quest to find the truth, and to wake up in the morning and they had stolen all my money and tied me up, and now they were going to be selling me into slavery. But he said, nonetheless, that happened, and I was sold in the marketplace. This one Jewish man, he purchased me. And sometime later, excuse me, this Jewish man, he gifted me to his cousin. When his cousin came to get me and he took me to his farm to work in his farm, when I saw the place that we entered into, I was blown away. I was astounded that it was similar to the place that the old priest had described to me, that it looked like that, surrounded by date palm trees and had mountains in the distance. And so I figured that God had brought me to where I was supposed to be. So he says, now I lived in servitude. I was serving this Jewish man, this slave owner who had purchased me, and just kind of biding my time, waiting to see what would occur and how things would play out. He said until one day, his friend came to visit him, and he said that, all these Arabs, and he was describing the people of Medina, the Aus and the Khazraj. He said, how they're believing in this new religion? Well, he said that their prophet has now come. He has now arrived. And when he said that the prophet has now come and has now arrived, he said, my ears perked up. He said, I was climbed up in a tree, cleaning up the tree and plucking dates from the tree. When I heard that, I almost fell out of the tree. I came down and I said, what did you say? Tell me. And he said, the slave owner, he slapped me across the face and he said, go back to work, mind your own business. This doesn't concern you. So he said that I made a mental note of this, and now I wanted to go and find out. And I had those 3 signs. So he says that at this time, the Prophet ﷺ, when he first made the hijrah from Mecca to Medina, they were arriving in the city of Quba on the outskirts of Medina. And so he said that I went there. what I did was I gathered together some dates and I made a little kind of basket, humble little thing. I was a slave. And I went out to the Masjid al-Quba and I went to this man who they said was a prophet. And I put it before him. And I said that I've heard that you and many of your followers have come here. And many of your followers seem to be in a tough financial situation. So here's some sadaqah, here's some charity. And he said the first sign that the old priest had told me was that this prophet, if you go and you give him charity, sadaqah, he will distribute it to his followers, but he himself, he will never take from it. He will not eat from charity. So he said that when I delivered the basket of dates and called it sadaqah, charity, he said, I saw that the Prophet ﷺ said, thank you very much. And then he called some Sahaba and he said, distribute it to the people. And he said, I sat at a distance and I watched and I saw that he himself, the Prophet, would not eat from it. He would not eat from it. So I made a mental note, check. He said, it took me a while to get together enough dates to be able to make another basket. I was a slave. I only got daily rations. So it was almost a couple of weeks. And he said, by this time, the Prophet ﷺ had come and settled in Medina. So he says, I came to him with another little basket. And I said to him that this is a gift that I would like to give you. And he said, the second sign that the old priest had told me was that when you give this prophet a gift, he will receive it. He will share it with others, but he himself will take from it as well, because gifts are good. So he said that I sat at a distance and I watched very carefully. And I saw that the Prophet ﷺ took the gift basket, he passed around the dates, and then he had some himself. So I said, check. Second sign. And then it was time for the third sign. The third sign the old priest had told me was, on his upper back between his shoulder blades, there will be kind of a protrusion of his skin, like a cluster of moles is described in some narrations, or just like an overall bump. And that is known as the seal of prophethood, Khatamun Nubuwah. And that will be the third sign, that he will have this marking, the same man. So he said, I walked around behind him, hoping that I could spot this mark, looking, searching, very carefully, very diligently. And I'm looking from a distance at his back, and the Prophet ﷺ used to wear like a shawl over his upper body, very common garments that the Prophet ﷺ wore, clothes that he wore, were he would have a lower cloth, like we tie in ihram, a lower cloth called the nizar, or lungi as it's referred to in some cultures, tied around his waist or his lower body, and then he'd have like an upper garment, like a shawl, kind of like men wear in ihram. It's called the izar and rida. And so he had that on, and I'm trying to look and see if I can get a vantage point to see his upper back, but obviously I couldn't see it. And I sat back there for a while, looking and looking and looking, hoping for a chance. And he said that the Prophet ﷺ, you know, when somebody's looking at you, staring at you, you feel it after some time. And the Prophet ﷺ was the most perceptive human being that ever lived. He said after a while, obviously, the Prophet ﷺ realized I was back there staring at him. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, I know what you're looking for. And he lowered his shawl, and I saw the mark on his back. And he said, I ran and I hugged the Prophet ﷺ, and I grabbed him from behind, and I cried and I cried and I cried like how a child cries. And I said, I've been searching for you and looking for you my whole life, and finally found you. Salman Al-Farsi radiallahu ta'ala anhu endured so much adversity. He went through so much difficulty to find the truth, to find a meaningful connection to Allah, to find what was right. And it got very difficult and challenging at some times, but he never gave up. He never lost his resolve. Look, he dealt with corruption. He dealt with oppression. He dealt with violence. But he never gave up his search for the truth. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ complimented him in Hadith al-Bukhari. The Prophet ﷺ said, لَوْ كَانَ الدِّينُ بِالثُّرَيَّا لَنَالَهُ آلُ سَلْمَانَ. The Prophet ﷺ said that even if the truth were to be found on another planet, Salman and people like Salman would find their way to another planet to find the truth. As like a euphemism, as an example. That's his yearning for the truth. That's how hard he strives to find what's right. And Salman's struggle honestly did not even end there. Salman radiallahu ta'ala anhu was now Muslim, but he was still a slave owned by this Jewish man. Many Sahaba went to the Jewish man and tried to offer to purchase the freedom of Salman, but the man was stubborn. He would not budge. So finally, the Battle of Badr came. Salman could not participate because he was in slavery. The Battle of Uhud came. He could not participate. He was in slavery. He finally one day came to the Prophet ﷺ and he was heartbroken. And the Prophet ﷺ could see it on his face. And the Prophet ﷺ made dua for him. And he said, Katib ya Salman, go and try once again to make him an offer that you will buy your own freedom. And he said, I've tried before. He doesn't accept the offer. He said, try once more. I make dua for you. And Salman went to him and the man said, the slave owner said, fine, I'll sell you your freedom. But here are my terms. And he gave ridiculous terms, basically trying to make it impossible. He said, I have this huge stretch of land, empty land. It has enough room for 300 date palm trees. I want you to plant 300 date palm trees, which is very expensive, very difficult to do. 300 trees. And then after that, I want arba'ina awqiyah, like 40 grams of gold. Ridiculous price. Salman radiallahu ta'ala anhu heard him and he said, that's ridiculous. The next time he went to the masjid and he saw the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ inquired, so what happened? He said, Ya Rasulullah, he mocks me. Tell me what happened. And he told the Prophet ﷺ that these are his terms. The Prophet ﷺ said, okay, let's do it. The Prophet ﷺ made an announcement in the masjid, A'inu akhakum, help your brother. Donate date palm trees. Someone stood up and donated 10, 15, 1, 3, 7, 20. People started donating. They started writing down who was donating how much until they had 300 date palm trees collected. The Prophet ﷺ then said, we're still not done. We're going to gather together. Everyone bring whatever you've promised to donate. We're going to gather together on that land and we're going to plant it together. And they all gathered together to plant it together. And the Prophet ﷺ said, dig the hole, prepare the tree, but don't put it into the hole. I will lower down each tree with my own hand. And the Prophet ﷺ did that with all 300 date palm trees. Planted them into the ground with his own blessed hands. And this way they planted the whole garden. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, congratulations, Salman. But Salman had this look on his face. And the Prophet ﷺ said, what's wrong? He said, Ya Rasulullah, he's asked for something more. What more? There's 40 grams of gold, awqiyah. It was an ancient kind of measurement. And the Prophet ﷺ said, okay, don't worry. And the Prophet ﷺ reached back and someone had donated something recently to the Prophet ﷺ, like a package. It was still wrapped up. And he grabbed it and he handed it to him. And he said, here you go. Without even looking inside what was inside. Just handed it to him. Here you go. Salman took it quietly, walked over to the slave owner, and he said, your garden is planted. And he said, my gold? He just handed him the package. He hadn't looked inside. The man opened it, unlocked it, and it was a big old chunk of gold. And when the man weighed it, Salman radiallahu ta'ala anhu says, I swear to God, it came out to exactly 40 grams. And he said, this way I became free. And this was shortly before the Battle of the Trench. And then he says, when the Battle of the Trench happened, very famously, two things. Number one, they were trying to figure out how to defend themselves against the onslaught and the attack that was on its way. And Salman radiallahu ta'ala anhu was the one who gave the suggestion of digging a trench around Medina to protect the city. So he got to contribute. And there's another beautiful story that when they were distributing the groups of digging in different areas, the Prophet ﷺ just said, distribute yourselves amongst like family members and friends and community. So he said the Muhajirun were distributing amongst each other and the Ansar were distributing amongst each other, and an argument broke out. The Muhajirun said Salman should dig with us, he's not a native Medinan. And the Medinan said, Ansar said, Salman should dig with us because he was here in Medina before the Prophet ﷺ came, before the Muslims came. So when Islam came, he was already in Medina. So he's a local. And they were fighting over him. Not fighting to like, you take him, no, you take him. I don't want the Persian guy, I don't want the outsider. No. They were trying to claim him. Until finally it became such an argument that the Prophet ﷺ had to settle it. And he came out and he said, Salmanu minna al-bayt. Neither, Salman will not dig with either group. Salman will dig with me and my family because he's family to me. And so that is the story of Salman Al-Farsi radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that his desire to find the truth, what was right, to find Allah, to find a meaningful relationship with Allah. And no amount of adversity or difficulty could stop him. And then how the community embraced him. Obviously, there's always so many lessons we can take from this. But just to mention something that's very pertinent at the moment, and that is that obviously we find ourselves in a little bit of a challenging situation. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of people trying to figure out exactly what to do and how to do and what not to do. But during this time, we cannot despair. We cannot become distracted. But during this time, we need to focus on having a relationship with Allah. Pray, read Quran, participate in, beneficial learning like we're doing here, and stay strong during this time. And be a community. In what sense? Obviously, there's all the regulations of social distancing and whatnot, but be a community in the sense of check on one another, check up on each other, call, text, email, and be checking on one another. We're so busy. We're so busy normally that we don't even have time to talk to our loved ones. Your mother calls you and you send her a WhatsApp message back. Oh, I can't talk right now. Hope you're okay. Now's the time. Call people, video conference people, make time for people. And this is how we can also remember to be a community together, much like that community was there for Salman Al-Farsi radiallahu ta'ala anhu. I hope and pray that inshallah this was of benefit and that this was a beneficial discussion. I want to thank everyone, barakallahu feekum, for logging on and joining us. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless everyone. May Allah protect everyone. May Allah keep everyone safe and healthy. Once again, Jazakumullah khairan to our hosts, Darus Salam, for organizing this very, very beneficial, beautiful session. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them, for their service, for all the good work they do in the community, and for really their spirit of hospitality. That was one of the qualities that Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha quoted for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that taqrid dayf, that you are very hospitable to your guests. So mashallah, they embody that prophetic quality of hospitality. And so we thank them for that, and we ask Allah to reward them for that. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.